The night smelled of rain and roses, and yet it carried the weight of something broken. In the heart of the new frontier, beneath a fading gold sky, the old town bells rang for a wedding no one truly believed in. The people gathered outside the wooden chapel, whispering behind gloved hands and dusty hats. They spoke of her, the young woman whose beauty had been compared to dawn itself, and of the man she was about to marry, the one they called the ugly prince. He wasn't a prince by title, only by inheritance, a man born to wealth, power, and scars. Scars that told stories no one dared ask about. She stood before the cracked mirror inside the church house, fingers trembling as she adjusted the lace around her throat. Her heart beat wild, like a caged bird, caught between duty and an ache she could not name. She hadn't chosen this path. It had been chosen for her, sealed by her father's debts, the town's greed, and a contract signed in ink darker than night. Beyond the wooden doors, her future waited in boots and silence. When he entered, the air itself seemed to bend. He carried himself with the weight of command, his long coat dusted from the ride, eyes shadowed by the kind of sorrow that comes from years of war and loneliness. He was not a handsome man. The townsfolk had not lied about that. His face bore marks of fire and steel, reminders of battles fought far from love or comfort. Yet when he looked at her, there was something in his gaze steady, almost tender, that unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. The preacher cleared his throat, the candles flickered, and in that golden quiet, two strangers were bound for eternity. His gloved hand found hers, cold and certain, and she wondered if her life had just ended or begun. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. Horses stirred, restless under the darkening clouds. The town's whispers grew louder once the doors closed behind them. Some pitied her. Others envied the promise of her silk gown and the jewels that hung heavy on her wrists. But no one knew the truth, what it meant to belong to a man like him. He led her out of the chapel, through streets that smelled of wet soil and wild sage. The carriage waited, a black one, with brass fittings that gleamed faintly in the rain. She hesitated before stepping in, her reflection trembling in the window pane. He noticed. "It won't hurt you," he said, his voice low and rough, as though unused to kindness. She didn't answer, only lifted her dress and entered. The journey to his estate was long and silent. The road stretched through miles of wilderness, where coyotes howled and wind tore through the pines. Once she glanced at him, just once, and found him watching her, not with desire but with something more complex, something unreadable. There was no joy in his eyes, no victory. Only the quiet ache of a man who had lost more than he could ever regain. When they arrived, the mansion rose from the mist like a ghost, tall, aged, and beautiful in its loneliness. The servants greeted them with hushed voices, their faces a blend of fear and loyalty. He helped her down, his touch surprisingly gentle. She felt warmth beneath the cold leather of his gloves, and for a fleeting second, the fear inside her softened. That night, the house seemed alive with old secrets. The corridors were lined with portraits, each one telling of pride, tragedy, and the burden of bloodlines. Her room overlooked the valley, where the river shone like liquid silver under the moon. She stood by the window, her veil undone, the air brushing against her face. Freedom was so close, one step, one scream, one runaway horse, and yet she didn't move. There was a knock. She turned, startled. He stood there, without his coat, the lamplight revealing more of his face than she had dared to imagine. The scars were deep, yes, but so were the lines of strength. "You're frightened," he said quietly. "You should be." His honesty shook her more than any threat could. "I won't hurt you," he added, though his eyes betrayed a history that might. She wanted to speak, to ask him why fate had bound them this way, but words faltered. Instead, she watched as he walked toward the window and looked out into the rain. "They call me the ugly prince," he murmured, almost to himself. "Maybe they're right." I've seen too much to believe in fairy tales." Then he turned to her, his expression softer than the candlelight. "But I don't believe you were sent to punish me." The silence between them was heavy but not cruel. It was the kind that asks questions without words. He approached her slowly, his hand brushing the ribbon at her shoulder. She flinched, and he froze not out of anger but respect. "You don't have to fear me," he said again, his voice almost broken. "I've lived with shadows long enough. I won't become one for you." Something inside her shifted. She had expected coldness, perhaps ownership, but not this raw humanity in a man the world had turned into legend and monster alike. The way he stood there, unsure of how to touch her, made him more real than anyone she had ever known. The wind howled outside, carrying the sound of church bells from miles away. He stepped closer, not to claim her, but to meet her eyes. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the scars, the soldier who had returned to find the world moved on without him. She felt her own walls crumble, piece by piece, until only two hearts remained, one terrified, the other tired of fighting. When his hand finally touched her cheek, it was not possession, it was apology. His fingers trembled as though afraid she might vanish. And when he bent his head, his kiss was not expected, not demanded. It was a promise made in silence, a question asked with fire and restraint. The moment it happened, her world tilted. The fear that had caged her heart melted into something fierce and wild, something she couldn't name. It wasn't love yet, but it was alive, burning with the strange beauty of surrender. When he drew back, the air between them shimmered like heat rising off desert sand. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But something had changed, something that neither of them could undo. Outside, lightning tore across the sky, painting the world in silver and flame. He stepped away, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't have to stay," he said. "The door will never be locked." But she didn't move. Her hands trembled at her sides, her breath shallow. She wanted to hate him, to run from the man who had stolen her freedom. And yet, as the thunder echoed and his footsteps faded down the corridor, her lips still burned with the memory of his touch. It frightened her more than anything she had ever known, not because it hurt, but because it felt real. She turned back to the window, rain streaking down the glass like tears. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf cried to the moon, its lonely call drifting through the night. She whispered to the emptiness, unsure if she meant the words for him or herself. "What have you done to me?" The candle flickered. The wind died. And in that stillness, her heart answered the question she wasn't ready to face. The night after the wedding carried a strange stillness. The rain had passed, but its memory lingered in the scent of damp earth and the way mist clung to the valley. She lay awake in the wide, cold bed, listening to the whisper of wind through the tall pines. Somewhere in the distance an owl called, and the sound felt like a secret meant only for her. Sleep would not come. Her thoughts wandered back to that kiss, the one she could neither explain nor forget. It had been fire and sorrow all at once, a touch that spoke of things buried deep in both their hearts. When morning broke, she rose to find the mansion already alive with movement. Servants hurried quietly through the hallways, careful not to meet her eyes. She could feel their curiosity like a weight on her back. To them, she was the outsider, the girl brought here by duty, bound to a man they feared and pitied in equal measure. "The ugly prince," they whispered, but never within his hearing. Even now, his name carried the kind of silence that only power could enforce. Downstairs, the breakfast table was long enough for a dozen guests, yet only 2 chairs were occupied. He sat at the head, posture straight, eyes hidden behind a wall of thought. When she entered, he looked up. The faintest trace of surprise flickered across his face, as though he hadn't expected her to appear. "You didn't have to rise early," he said softly. "This house is yours now. Rest when you please." His words were kind, but his tone held a formality that kept her distant. She sat opposite him, hands folded neatly in her lap. "I don't sleep much," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her a moment before nodding. "Neither do I." A long silence settled between them. The sunlight streamed through the high windows, turning the dust in the air into gold. She dared a question. "You fought in the war?" His fork paused midair. For a heartbeat, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, he said, "Yes, I fought and lost." She didn't ask what he'd lost. The scars on his face told part of the story, but she sensed the deeper wounds were the kind no surgeon could touch. He changed the subject soon after, speaking of practical things, the lands to the east, the workers who managed the cattle, the storms that often tore through the valley come spring. His voice grew steadier when he spoke of the land, as though it was the only thing that had never betrayed him. Days passed slowly. The house was vast, its walls heavy with portraits and whispers of generations gone. She walked its corridors like a ghost, tracing her fingers along the carved banisters, listening to the echo of her own steps. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him at the stables, tending his horse himself despite having men to do it. There was a quiet strength in the way he moved, measured, disciplined, solitary. One afternoon, while exploring the west wing, she found a locked door. It was old, its wood scarred by time and flame. Something about it made her pause. The air felt colder there, as though the room behind it carried memories better left undisturbed. A servant passing by noticed her standing there and froze. "You shouldn't linger near that door, ma'am," the woman said nervously. "It's not used anymore." "Why?" she asked. The servant's eyes darted away. "It's his brother's room," she whispered. "He died before the war." Later that evening, curiosity won over caution. When she asked him about it over supper, his face darkened. "Some things in this house are better forgotten," he said, his voice tight. Then, after a moment, more softly, he was the better man. "The one meant to live the life I now bear." She didn't press further, but the mystery of that locked door stayed with her. It seemed to pulse like a heartbeat within the house, calling to her when the nights grew too quiet. One evening, while the rain began again, she stood by the fireplace, lost in thought. He entered without a sound. "The storm is coming hard from the north," he said. It might last the night. His coat was soaked from tending the horses, and water dripped from his gloves. She reached for a towel instinctively, handing it to him before she could think better of it. Their fingers brushed and something flickered again between them, unspoken, undeniable. He didn't pull away this time. Instead, he met her gaze, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" she asked. "A frightened child. A spoiled girl who'd curse my name before dawn." His mouth curved in something close to a smile. "But you've held your ground." "I was raised to endure," she replied. He nodded, studying her face as though memorizing it. Then, in a voice low enough to almost vanish under the crackle of flames, he said, "Endurance is a lonely virtue." After he left, she stood by the fire long after it had dimmed, her heart unsettled. The more she learned of him, the less she understood and the more she wanted to. Each word he spoke carried weight, each silence even more. There was a sadness to him, a story buried under duty and scars. And somehow she felt tied to it now. The next morning she woke to find a letter on her dresser. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate. "I will be gone for 3 days. There is a storm coming to the eastern ridge, and I must see to it myself. You will be safe here." There was no signature. He never signed his notes, but his presence lingered in the ink. Those 3 days stretched endlessly. The house creaked and groaned under the wind. She kept hearing faint sounds, footsteps where there should be none, whispers in the walls. On the second night, she thought she heard a door open somewhere down the hall. When she followed the sound, she found the corridor empty. Only the locked door at the west wing stood silent and still. By the third night, she could bear it no longer. With a lantern in hand, she walked through the corridors, her white nightdress brushing the cold stone floors. She stopped before the forbidden door. The key still hung on the wall beside it, half hidden behind a cracked portrait. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Something deep inside warned her to turn back, but curiosity, or perhaps fate, pushed her onward. The key fit perfectly. The lock gave a soft click, and the door creaked open. The room smelled of dust and ash. Furniture lay covered with sheets, untouched for years. On the mantel, she saw a framed photograph of two men standing shoulder to shoulder. One of them was him, younger, without scars. The other, almost identical, save for a softer smile. His brother. She moved closer, noticing burn marks along the floorboards near the window. Something terrible had happened here. Before she could step further, a gust of wind slammed the door behind her. The lantern flickered wildly. Her breath caught as she turned, and in the reflection of the old mirror, for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw someone standing behind her. But when she spun around, there was no one. Only silence. When he returned the next morning, the sky had cleared. She found him in the stables again, dirt and exhaustion clinging to him. He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You went in there, didn't you?" Her heart stuttered. Yes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." He shook his head, eyes distant. "You saw what I could never bring myself to destroy." She waited, unsure if she should speak. He took a slow breath. "My brother died because of me. The fire, the war, all of it. And I've lived every day since trying to make peace with ghosts that never rest." His voice broke slightly. "That's what this house is, a monument to what I couldn't save." She wanted to comfort him, but the weight of his pain pressed too deep between them. And yet, as he turned away, she felt the same strange pull she'd felt that first night, the ache of something unfinished, the spark of something dangerous and true. The story between them was far from over, but the shadow that lingered in that locked room had only just begun to awaken. Morning settled over the valley with a thin white fog that rose from the river and curled around the cottonwoods like breath. She stood on the porch with a shawl around her shoulders, watching ranch hands ride out toward the eastern ridge. The world looked peaceful from there, but peace felt like a veil stretched over a drum. Every sound had a hollow echo to it, as if the land itself remembered what the house tried to hide. The wedding kiss still warmed her when she let herself recall it, sudden as lightning and steady as a hearth. That warmth kept surprising her. It was a troublesome comfort, a flame that did not ask her permission before it burned. He joined her without warning, boots soft on the planks. The scars along his cheek caught the dull shine of morning. He had shaved, and for the first time she noticed the careful order he kept about himself. Even the leather of his belt was oiled and worn smooth, as if he believed small rituals could hold a broken life in place. He handed her a tin cup of coffee that steamed in the cold. She took it with a mumbled thank you, and they stood side by side looking at the line where fog met sky. "There is talk in town," he said after a while. "Railroad men are pushing through the North Pass. They want rights along the river. They will come asking about our land." "Our land?" she repeated, startled by the way the word felt in her mouth. He heard it too. A brief look crossed his face, something like hope wrestling with caution. "They will bring papers and promises. And if that fails, they will bring trouble." He lifted his eyes to the ridge where the fog thinned. "This valley is not for sale." She thought of the contract that had tied her life to his, the debt that had forced her father's hand. The same debt hung over her now like a storm cloud. She set the cup down. "My father used the railroad agent to pressure me. He said they were our only chance. That is how they work," he said. "They twist the road until it looks like a path home." He paused. "I won't let them near you." His words should have comforted her. Instead, they stirred a knot of worry deeper in her chest. Protection and control can wear the same coat, and she was not yet sure which one he meant to wear for her. Still, The way he said near you had a care in it that she could not ignore. She nodded and turned toward the yard. I will do what I can to help, she said. If there are letters to write or men to feed, I can manage a kitchen and a ledger. A shadow of a smile moved at the edge of his mouth. There is nothing in this house you cannot manage, he said, which sounded like permission and also like a vow. By midday, the house felt busier than any day since the wedding. The cook asked for extra hands to prepare meals for the riders. She rolled up her sleeves, tied on an apron, and worked beside the kitchen women, measuring flour with steady hands and finding small comfort in the clean logic of bread. When the dough rose and the ovens glowed, she looked up to find the maid who had warned her away from the locked door standing in the passage, twisting a kerchief. "Ma'am," the maid said, choosing her words with care. There was a letter at the gate. A rider brought it before sunup and said it was urgent. I put it on your writing desk. She nodded her thanks and wiped her hands. The letter sat like a small thread on the desk upstairs. The seal was red, stamped with a plain circle. She broke it and read her father's hand. He wrote that the railroad agent had come to the house again. He wrote that the debt note the banker held had taken new teeth. He told her not to worry, which was always the line a man wrote when he wished to hide fear. At the bottom there was a postscript that left her cold. The agent had asked if the man she married would consider a sale. He had used a phrase that rang hard in her mind. The ugly prince cannot afford enemies. She folded the paper and looked to the window. Beyond the glass, the hills lay quiet and green, and the river moved with a silver patience that made human plans look small. Still, the letter changed the air. She tucked it into the drawer and went to find him. He was in the barn, bridle in hand, speaking low to his horse. When she gave him the letter, he read it once, then again. A careful stillness came over him, the sort that precedes a decision. Your father should not be harassed, he said. I will send a man. He will send more than words back, she answered. The agent will come here. I know, he said. Which is why we must be ready. The house began to move to his rhythm. He met with the foreman and made lists. He sent a rider to the county seat to confirm the line of the deed. He spoke to the older hands about the North Pass and asked questions about strangers seen near the river trail. He wrote a letter and sealed it with dark wax. When she asked who it was for, he hesitated, then said, An old friend who owes me more than coin. At supper, the lamps burned steady and low. He looked tired but clear. She studied him across the long table and wondered what he had been before war and fire, before scars and a house full of portraits. Men are not born into legend. Something makes them put on that weight. She wanted to know what had happened in the West Wing room beyond the burn marks. She did not ask, but the question hung between them like smoke. That night the wind changed. It brought the smell of iron and coal, the faint scent of civilization marching. Near midnight the dogs barked. She woke and went to the window. Lanterns bobbed like scattered stars down at the gate. He was already in the yard, coat thrown over his nightshirt, boots hastily pulled on. The men at the gate were not ranch hands. Their hats had a town tilt to them, and their clothes carried the fine dust of travel rather than work. One held a folder under his arm. She went down, ignoring the maid's warning. The men introduced themselves. One was a railroad representative with a clean hat and a smile that never reached his eyes. Another was a junior clerk with ink on his fingers. The third man wore a sheriff's badge that he did not deserve. The representative spoke with smooth confidence. He praised the valley. He praised the ranch. He praised the future of commerce and the dignity of progress. He offered a valuation and a promise of employment for every man displaced by the new line. This river is the spine of our plan, he said pleasantly. We will be good neighbors, he answered by stepping forward until the lamplight showed every line of his face. You will be no neighbor of mine, he said. There is a deed. There is a fence. There is a river. All three say the same thing. His voice did not rise. It did not have to. The sheriff cleared his throat a little too loudly. "No one is here to force a matter tonight," he said in a way that implied tomorrow might be different. The railroad man closed his folder with a soft clap and tipped his hat toward her, as if to remind the yard who paid for silk in a dry county. When they left, their lanterns moved back down the road like a patient snake. He watched until the last light vanished. Then he turned to her, jaw tight. "They will try the courts," he said. "And when paper fails, they will try fire." The word landed between them like a dropped nail. She looked toward the west wing where the locked door slept. "Again," she said without meaning to. "Again," he answered. The next days brought new strains. A fence was cut near the north pasture. Someone left a dead jackrabbit wired to the gatepost with a little card tucked under its paw that read, "Welcome to the Age of Progress." In town, a grocer refused to sell to their foreman until cash was laid down first. A whisper rose that the scarred rancher had killed his brother in a jealous fit. It was a dirty rumor, the kind that grows in the dark and feeds on fear. She heard it in the milliner's shop when she went to buy thread. The women fell silent when she entered, then spoke again in careful, loud tones about other things. Shame warmed her skin, though she had done nothing to earn it. She found herself visiting the west wing at noon when the house was bright. She stood in the doorway of the locked room and tried to read the past from a few burned boards and a photograph on the mantel. She studied the faces in the picture until her eyes ached. 2 brothers, 2 futures. She discovered a small locket in a trinket box, the kind a woman would wear beneath her collar. Inside was a curl of hair and a faded scrap of ribbon. It felt like the memory of a promise. She slipped it back and closed the lid gently, as though any sound might disturb the dead. The cook told her that the house had once been full of music. The maid said the winter after the fire was the coldest anyone could remember. The stable boy said he heard voices when he watered the horses at dawn, voices that weren't coming from the living. She did not believe in ghosts, but she believed in grief, which behaves like one. On a gray afternoon, she rode with him to the high ridge where the whole valley looked like a map. He showed her the line of old cottonwoods that marked the first survey done by his grandfather. He showed her the bend in the river where salmon once ran so thick a man could walk on their backs, or so the story said. He spoke about soil and snowpack and the way wind carves patterns in grass. He spoke like a man who wants to pass a language to someone before it is lost. "Why did the fire start that night?" she asked carefully. "In your brother's room." He did not answer at once. He dismounted and walked a few paces, hands on his hips. When he turned back, the look in his eyes was plain and raw. "Because I brought home a war that did not end," he said. "Because I trusted a man who sold us for coin." He shook his head as if to clear a vision. "There are truths that cut both the teller and the hearer. I will not wound you with them before I must." She watched him, not as a wife bound by debt, but as a person who had begun to care in spite of sense. "What if sharing is not a wound?" she said softly. "What if it is a bandage?" "Maybe," he answered. "The bandages come after the bleeding." They rode back in silence. At the gate a stranger waited, hat in hand, posture apologetic but eyes sharp. He carried no papers. He said he was a carpenter seeking work. His accent came from the east. She noticed the half-sole on his left boot and the scar near his thumb where a ring had once been. He kept glancing at the windows of the house, mapping them in his mind. He was turned away with a friendly word and a silver coin to send him off. After he left, he said in a voice only she could hear, "That man smells of smoke." Night fell hard. A thin moon rose. She could not sleep. The locket weighed on her thoughts, the railroad's threat pressed on her ribs, and the memory of the kiss kept returning to fight back the cold. She walked the corridor and stopped outside the west wing again. From somewhere inside the wall, a faint tapping sounded. It could have been a mouse. It could have been the house settling. It could have been a man counting out watches through a long night. She stepped closer and felt a draft at the baseboard. Kneeling, she found an uneven seam and a loosened nail. With careful fingers, she pried the board back enough to slip her hand through. Her fingertips touched cloth and then paper. She drew out a small oilskin packet tied with string. Inside lay a folded letter and a page torn from a ledger. The ledger page listed payments from a company with a cold, clean name. The letter was addressed to his brother in a hand she knew by now. It was his. The words were few, but they burned. Meet me at the North Pass before midnight. Bring the contract. Come alone. Her breath shallowed. She stood in the dark corridor with the packet in her hands, feeling the weight of what it implied. A summons to the pass on the night of the fire. A hidden ledger record that joined the ranch to the company that now hunted the river. Secrets nested within secrets, the oldest with teeth. She did not know if the letter was a trap he had fallen into or a trap he had set. She did not know whether the packet was hidden by him in shame or by the dead in warning. She only knew that dawning truth could either save a life or ruin it. And she knew that men would soon return with paper and guns. She wrapped the packet and held it to her chest. From the yard below came a whistle, then the quick answer of two more, a pattern she had not heard before. Lanterns moved near the barn in a hush that felt wrong. The dogs growled under their breath. She went to wake him, lips forming his name, heart striking hard against bone like a fist on a door that will not open. He rose fast, alert as a soldier, and crossed to the window. Below, 3 figures slipped from the shadows to the stable wall. One carried a can, another carried a coil of wire. The third watched the house. He reached for his coat and the rifle behind the armoire. She put her hand on his arm without thinking. "If we step into a fight tonight," she said in a voice that surprised her with its steadiness, "we walk into it together." He looked at her, and in that brief pause she felt the same heat that had started on their wedding night, a heat that meant truth and risk and the choice to stand. He nodded once. Then he blew out the lamp, opened the door to the hall, and led her into the dark where the house waited to see what kind of story it would hold next. Night pressed close around the house like a held breath. The wind had gone still, the sky a stretch of dark glass. From the upstairs window, she could see the flicker of lanterns moving through the trees. The men outside were not strangers anymore. They were coming for something they believed belonged to them. The valley lay silent except for the faint rustle of horses and the dull clank of metal. She could almost hear the tension hum in the air. He stood beside her, rifle loaded, eyes fixed on the distant glow near the barn. "They're here sooner than I thought," he said. His voice carried no fear, only weariness, the tone of a man who had seen too many nights like this one. "Stay close to me. If I tell you to run, you ride south toward the canyon. Don't look back." Her heart pounded hard enough to make her breath shallow. "And you?" she asked quietly. "I finished what I started," but she didn't move. She remembered the letter hidden in her sleeve, the one she'd found behind the wall. Its ink still smelled faintly of smoke and regret. The words burned through her mind. "Meet me at the North Pass before midnight." She hadn't told him about it yet. Something inside her warned that tonight was not the moment, or maybe it was the only moment left. They stepped into the corridor, their footsteps muffled by old rugs. Every candle they passed seemed to tremble in its flame. The air held the sharp scent of oil and fear. She could hear the servants whispering in the kitchen below, doors bolted, prayers whispered under breath. He moved like a man walking into his own memory, his face a shadow carved from the dim light. Outside, the first shot cracked through the stillness. It hit the ground near the porch, kicking up dirt. She flinched, clutching his arm. "They're warning shots," he said, voice calm but eyes alive with calculation. "They want me to come out. Will you?" He looked at her then, and for a moment, all the anger, sorrow, and longing in him met her gaze like a storm. "If I don't, they'll burn this place." and I won't lose another home to fire." He stepped outside, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. The light threw long, trembling shadows across the yard. The men by the gate stood in a half-circle, 5, maybe 6 of them. Their faces were hidden beneath hats, but the leader's voice was clear. "You had your chance," the man called. The company made a fair offer. "You refused." "The land isn't for sale," he answered, voice steady. "Then we'll take it by the river," the man said. "You can keep your ashes." The lantern light caught the metal can one of the men held. It wasn't oil this time, it was powder. A slow kind of fire. He raised his rifle, not to shoot, but to hold it steady in warning. "You'll leave this property now," he said. "Or you'll find out that progress burns both ways." From her place at the doorway, she could see the way his shoulders squared, the way his breath never quickened. There was no bravado in him, only a tired defiance that belonged to men who had already made peace with death. The leader spat into the dirt. "This isn't your fight anymore. You were paid once before when the war ended. You don't get to rewrite the terms." Something in that sentence made her blood go cold. Paid once before. The letter. The ledger. The name of the company stamped in black ink. The truth hit her hard. Whatever deal his brother had died over, it wasn't finished. Before she could speak, thunder cracked not from the sky, but from his rifle. The shot hit the dirt near the man's boots, scattering them back. Horses reared, men cursed, and the quiet night erupted into motion. They fired back. The porch railing splintered beside her. He turned, shouting for her to stay down, then fired again. Smoke filled the yard. The scent of gunpowder clung thick in the air. The house behind her felt alive, groaning under the echoes of the fight. She crawled toward the side door, heart hammering. Through the haze, she saw one of the attackers moving toward the barn with a torch. If the horses burned, the whole valley would light up. She ran before she could think, grabbing a bucket from the well. He saw her, shouted something she couldn't hear, but she didn't stop. The rain barrel near the stable still held enough water to douse the first spark. The man turned, startled by the sight of her charging from the dark. His arm swung up, torch flaring. She threw the bucket. Water and flame collided, hissed, died. He grabbed her wrist, rough and strong, but before he could pull her close, a shot rang out. He fell backward into the mud, his hand still reaching for the torch that never burned. He was there in an instant, breath heavy, eyes wide. "You shouldn't have come out," he said, voice rough with fear and anger both. He looked at her, truly looked, and something broke inside him. "You're not what I deserve," he whispered. The shooting stopped. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The men were retreating toward the tree line, dragging their wounded, but she knew this wasn't over. The railroad men wouldn't stop after one night. They'd come again in daylight with law and paper and more guns. They stood there in the muddy yard, surrounded by the smoke of near ruin. The barn was safe, the house still standing, but the cost had only begun. He lowered his rifle and ran a hand over his face, streaked with ash. "It's starting again," he said quietly. "Just like before." She finally pulled the letter from her sleeve and held it out. "You need to see this," she said. He took it, read it, and his expression froze. "Where did you get this?" "Behind the west wall. It was hidden with the ledger page." "It's your writing, isn't it?" He didn't deny it. His eyes darkened like the sky before a storm. "That letter was never meant to reach him," he said, voice low. "It was bait. I sent it because I knew someone else would intercept it. The night he went to the pass, I followed him. But when I reached the ridge, the fire had already started." He stopped, jaw tight. "They said I killed him." "Maybe I did, by trusting the wrong man." "Who?" she asked. He met her gaze. "The same one who signed your father's debt. The same man who stood at that gate tonight." Her breath caught. The line between past and present snapped together like iron links. Then he's been planning this since before I was born. Longer, he said. My brother made a deal with him to save this land. I made another to protect what was left. And now they've come to claim both debts. Thunder rumbled again, real this time, rolling in from the mountains. The first drops of rain hit the earth like sparks on powder. She felt the weight of it all closing in the house full of ghosts, the men who wanted blood, the truth that had waited years to be uncovered. We can leave, she said, desperate. We can go south, start again. He shook his head. If we run, they'll burn what's behind us. This land is more than dirt and fences. It's every life buried here, every promise broken. She stepped closer. Then we fight together. Lightning flared, showing his face in stark white light. If we do, you have to know the truth, he said. What I did that night, the secret that ties me to them. It isn't just about the land. The rain came harder now, pounding the roof, washing the blood from the dirt. She could barely hear his next words, but the look in his eyes told her everything. Whatever he was about to confess was the one thing that could shatter everything between them. He took a breath, but before he could speak, a flash of movement caught her eye at the edge of the trees. A figure stood there, half hidden, holding a torch against the rain. And then she realized the man wasn't retreating. He was signaling. The barn door shuddered, and from within came a low rumble, followed by the unmistakable crack of another explosion, this time from inside. The ground shook, light flared, and the horses screamed. He grabbed her arm and pulled her back as the barn erupted in flame. The fire rose high, orange and furious, painting their faces with terror and resolve. Sparks flew into the storm, lighting the night like stars born of destruction. He turned toward her, eyes fierce and alive. They want a war, he said. Then they'll have one. And as the fire raged behind them, she saw what the world would never believe, the so-called ugly prince standing like a man reborn, not of beauty, but of defiance and love that refused to die in the rain. The thunder swallowed his next words, and she couldn't tell whether he said her name or the name of the ghost he had been fighting all along. The valley burned, the storm rose, and the night drew them both toward the edge of everything that still could be lost. Rain carried the night through until dawn, washing away the smoke but not the ruin. The barn was gone, a black skeleton against the pale sky. The smell of ash clung to everything, yet the house still stood. She woke on the parlor floor, wrapped in a blanket, her hands still stained from mud and smoke. He sat nearby, eyes open, watching the gray light creep through the window. Neither of them spoke at first. There were no words fit for what the night had taken. When he finally stood, he moved stiffly, shoulders heavy. The horses are gone, he said quietly, and the men left tracks toward the canyon. They'll be back, but not today. His voice cracked slightly, as if part of him still couldn't believe they'd survived. She rose, walked to the window, and saw the charred remains of the barn door swaying in the wind. You said this happened before, she whispered. That fire took your brother. Now it's come for you again. He looked at her, the shadows under his eyes deep. It's never been about me. It's the land they want, the papers that prove who it belongs to. They'll come with law next time, not torches. She reached into her coat pocket and drew out the small oilskin packet, the letter and ledger that had survived the night. Then we use this, she said. The truth they buried is stronger than fire. He stared at the packet, silent for a long moment. You still trust me, after knowing I had a hand in all this? She stepped closer. You tried to save him. You tried to make peace with the men who never wanted peace. Whatever happened that night, it doesn't make you what they say you are. Something shifted in his face, relief, disbelief, maybe even hope. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, he said. Maybe it's not about deserving, she replied softly. Maybe it's about ending what should have ended long ago, He nodded slowly, as though he'd been waiting for those words longer than she'd been alive. Together, they rode out that morning to the valley edge where the smoke still hung low. The ground was soft from rain, and every hoof print told the story of the men who had fled. When they reached the North Pass, the same ridge where his brother had died, he dismounted and stood staring into the distance. The wind whistled through the pines like a hymn for the dead. "This was where I found him," he said quietly. "He was supposed to meet the company man. I came too late. The fire took everything. They called it an accident, but I knew better." She unfolded the letter and held it beside the torn ledger page. "The handwriting on the ledger isn't yours," she said. "It's the same as the one who came to our gate, the one with the sheriff's badge." His eyes narrowed, jaw tightening. "So he was part of it from the start. The deal, the fire, even your father's debt. He wanted all of it," she said. "The land, the river, and the silence that comes after." He took the papers, studying them as though they were maps to a buried truth. "This is enough," he said finally. "Enough to make them answer." By evening, the sky cleared. He rode into town with a packet tied to his saddle, she beside him. The road wound through wild sage and open prairie, quiet except for the distant cry of hawks. Every mile felt like the closing of a long, painful circle. When they reached the courthouse steps, the same men who had stood at their gate were already there, pretending calm but watching with sharp, wary eyes. The sheriff stood at the door, badge catching the sunlight. "You've had a rough night," he said coolly. "Should have taken the offer while you could." He dismounted, handed her the reins, and walked forward until only a few feet separated them. "I've taken worse," he said. "And I've come to return something you left behind." He threw the oilskin packet at the sheriff's boots. The papers spilled out, the ink still legible despite the rain. The crowd that had gathered around the steps fell silent. The sheriff's face paled as he bent to pick them up. "These are lies," he said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Then you won't mind if the judge sees them," he replied evenly. "Along with the record of payments you signed and the land deeds you forged after my brother's death." The railroad representative, standing just behind the sheriff, shifted uncomfortably. "Now, let's not make this into a spectacle," he said. "We can settle things privately." "That's what you said 10 years ago," he answered, his tone sharp but steady. "And my brother died for it. You burned my land last night. You tried to burn her too." There will be no more quiet deals. For a long moment, no one spoke. The crowd waited, breath held between law and violence. Then the sheriff's hand moved toward his revolver, but she was faster. She stepped between them, voice firm but trembling. "You've destroyed enough lives," she said. "If you draw that gun, the whole town will see what kind of justice you really stand for." The tension broke like a rope pulled too tight. The sheriff's hand froze, then fell to his side. The representative cursed under his breath and turned away. And in that single charged silence, the tide shifted. By nightfall, the papers were in the judge's hands. The sheriff was stripped of his badge and the railroad deal suspended pending investigation. The townsfolk whispered for weeks about the woman who'd faced a gun and the scarred man who refused to run. Some called it foolish bravery. Others called it redemption. Back at the ranch, the ruins of the barn still smoked faintly, but the fields were green again. The servants returned from their hiding places. The horses that had fled began to wander home, and the air no longer smelled of fear. She spent her mornings planting new roses near the porch, her hands in the soil, the same earth that had once been fought over like gold. He rebuilt the barn with his own hands, every plank a quiet vow to the life they were building out of ashes. Some evenings they would sit on the porch together, the valley stretching out before them, the river glinting in the last light. He would say little, but his silence no longer felt like a wall. It was peace, the kind that comes only after years of battle. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he turned to her and said, "You could have left that night." You could have saved yourself." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I did," she said. "Just not the way I expected." He looked out toward the horizon, where the river bent through the fields like a thread of silver. "I spent half my life believing scars meant punishment," he said. "Now I think maybe they're proof that something tried to destroy us and failed." She reached over and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, and warm. "You're not the ugly prince they spoke of," she said softly. "You're the man who stayed when the world told him to give up." He laughed under his breath, the sound light and human again. "And you're the woman who made me believe the fire could give back what it took." The last of the daylight settled over them, golden and soft. The roses by the porch swayed gently in the breeze. Somewhere beyond the hills, the railroad would still come, the world would still change. But for now, the land was theirs, and the peace they'd earned belonged to no one else. When the stars began to show, she rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the slow rhythm of his breath. "What will we do now?" she asked. He looked at her, his eyes calm for the first time in years. "We live," he said simply. "And we let the fire rest." The wind carried the faint scent of rain again, but this time it brought promise instead of warning. The valley that had once been marked by war and sorrow breathed quietly under the night sky. He reached for her hand again, holding it as if afraid the world might still take it away. "You know," he murmured, "when I kissed you that night, I thought it was goodbye. I didn't know it was the beginning." She smiled through the stillness. "It felt like both," she whispered. And there, beneath the endless sky of the frontier, two souls once bound by duty found what neither fire nor fear could take, a peace that burned brighter than all the flames that came before. The river kept flowing, the land kept breathing, and their story became part of the wind, carrying softly across the valley where love had outlived the ashes.